I love giant monster movies. I grew up not just on horror, but also Saturday morning kung fu theater and Godzilla and Gamera flicks, with a dash of Ultraman. But there's more to the kaiju genre than just the big boys. Over the years, there's been a good number of weird takes on the idea of some guy in a rubber suit stepping on cities. So I figured it was time to check out a bunch of the more bizarre ones. So that's what we're doing here. This is a list of 10 of the strangest off-brand kaiju flicks that I could find. So come on, let's get smashed. Number 10. Our first entry here is from the US in 1996, and it's Zaror the Invader, which begins with a large mountain and a giant monster bursting out of it in classic kaiju form. He's a big horned thing with massive claws and a spiny back. And meanwhile, in New Jersey, Tommy here is visited by a tiny woman who probably should be one of a set of twins, but oh well. She says that Tommy is chosen by a coalition of intelligent species in the galaxy to defend Earth, and he's told that he was selected because he's the exact average human for the job. Since half of all humans are better suited to defeat Zaror and half are less, he's right in the middle, which makes him their choice. She says that there's rules and that Zaror can't be defeated by any Earth weapon, and that the monster is tracking him, and that the creature holds the key to its own destruction. Desperate, he ends up having to kidnap a cryptozoologist to help him and gets the aid of a bumbling cop and sets out to save the world. Oh, did I mention that Zaror has laser eye beams and makes the same sound as the T-Rex from Jurassic Park? And this was the first entry of Full Moon's Monster Island sublabel, which was supposed to be their giant monster films as opposed to Full Moon, which seemed to focus on small monsters. It's pretty obvious that Zaror is meant to evoke images of Godzilla, just with eye blasts instead of radioactive breath, and it was directed by Aaron Osborne, who had previously only done Caged Heat 3000 and only made one film after this, which we'll discuss a little later. It looks like he left directing behind to focus on being a production designer, where he's had a really consistent and solid career with working on some high-profile projects. The odd thing about this one, though, is that it was also directed by Michael Deak, even though he's uncredited. He's mainly an FX guy and apparently shot the giant monster footage, which was completed before there was even a script. The rest of the movie was then written around the footage they had of Zaror to fill things out, and it's pretty fun, but tends to not give you enough of the big guy and focuses too much on the humans, and their actions are kind of unconnected, so it gets a bit tedious, but still very enjoyable if you dig that whole mid-90s Full Moon vibe. Number 9. This next one goes all the way back to 1976, and it's the Milos Monster, which begins with telling us about the dangers of too much waste and an overflowing of garbage. And one day, people come outside to trash thrown everywhere, and these giant footprints on the ground. There's also a giant hand grabbing up refuse from a garbage truck, and yep, you guessed it, there's a giant-sized creature that's stalking around town. And then there's a whole lot of footage of the townspeople just sort of doing their thing and going to carnivals with occasional glimpses of the beast just flying around because, oh yeah, it has wings like Ghidorah. It's mostly done with a guy in a suit, just using forced perspective to make it look gigantic, and it basically looks like a massive fly. And if you're curious where Milpitas is, well, since I was, it's in California, just south of San Francisco. And this was directed by Robert L. Burl, and is the only film that he directed, although he did a couple of other gigs for other projects, but really not much. This was pretty much his entire run in the industry. And if you think that this looks super cheap, well, it definitely was, and took 3 years to complete, since it began as a high school student project in Milpitas. They started it in 1973 to make a short film about the dangers of pollution, and Burrell wasn't one of the students. He was the instructor. As they started on the project, buzz around the town started to grow, and people were contributing money to it. So they kept expanding it, and soon ended up with a runtime of around 120 minutes. Well, they cut that down, thankfully, since I guarantee that it's mostly just footage of folks around town, which is what about 80% of this is. But you can tell that everyone is local, and they're putting their hearts into it. Number 8. Let's get a bit more modern here with 2020's Notzilla, which starts in 1962 with a kaiju being killed, but then a paleontologist saving its egg. He declared that the beast wasn't evil and that it was merely sick, and he attempts to take it to America, but accidentally flushes it out the airplane toilet, where it lands in Cincinnati. There's a nuclear testing group that are called Snuggie, full of hilarious eccentric characters, and they find the egg. It hatches and becomes this little hand puppet thing, and I'm pretty sure that it's aiming for comedy here, like partially a spoof kind of vibe. But yeah, I know that I'm usually tough on comedy, but this barely qualifies. I know I've said it before, but it bears repeating time and time again on this channel. I see some pretty terrible horror films. But here's the thing. In horror, if something doesn't quite work, then it usually stays pretty entertaining, even if it's for the wrong reasons. That does not apply to comedy. When comedy doesn't work, it becomes a freaking chore. And yeah, here, the creature grows when it drinks beer. And this one was directed by Mitch Teamley, and his filmography is pretty weird. It's almost all really faith-based Christian films, like a short film called Jesus Go, that I guess saying that Jesus was the first Pokemon, since he said to go out in the world and collect all the followers or something. But this is pretty different than any of the other things in his roster, and it doesn't really show. Like, if you hadn't told me that this is from a creator that almost strictly made Christian content, I don't think I would have taken that away from it. I mean, I don't know. I like the puppet, even though it's really towing the lines in terms of copyright, I suppose. But they do some fun stuff with the perspective and dolls and that. But yeah, I hate to say it, because it seems like this is a labor of love. But it's just not funny in the slightest. Like, every joke falls flat, and they're really trying. And again, trying to be funny often equates to excruciating torment. Number 7. The same year as the American version of Godzilla, 1998, we also had Craw the Sea Monster. Although make sure that you catch the exclamation point after Craw there. It's like Craw the Sea Monster. This has this robed dude named Lord Doom who is looking for revenge and wants to destroy Earth, but is told that he'll be opposed by the Planet Patrol, who are a group of what looks like teenagers in pretty impractical outfits. One of them is psychic, and it's Alison Lohman in her first on-screen role. Like, she had only done an animated voice before this in 1984 when she was 5 years old, so this is probably what you consider her start in acting. They see something big enter Earth's atmosphere, and it's Craw, a huge sea thing. They say that he's a planet wrecker for hire, so I guess you can just pay him to go smash a whole world that you don't like. What do you pay a giant crab? They also say that he's pretty dumb, but very strong. But then Lord Doom damages their ship, so they have to reach out to an Earthbound agent, who appears to be this blobby little guy named Mogyar, who is helped by a waitress and biker. The military gets their hands on the little guy while Craw goes about destroying cities, and this was the second and final film released under Full Moon's Monster Island imprint. I guess that sales weren't strong enough on these two films to really keep it going, so there were no more after this one. Considering that they were likely made to cash in on the 98 Godzilla, and that film didn't do that well, they probably just didn't see it having much future. Like Zarkor, it was by Aaron Osborne, but not all of it. It seems like he handled all of the Earth stuff and everything involving Craw and Mogyar, but all of the Planet Patrol stuff and Lord Doom was actually done by Dave Parker, longtime Full Moon director. It's kind of obvious because the two storylines almost seem completely separate from each other, and if you removed all that stuff and just left the Earth bits, you still have a full story, so I assume that Parker's bits were added to get it to feature length. And meanwhile, here's the weirdest thing I found in this film. You have this biker character, Bobby, and he's got a thick mane and bushy beard. And after escaping government custody, in the very next scene, he's shaved his head and face completely bald. And I don't know why. Like, if they were doing it to be like, we're on the run from the government and need to be incognito, then maybe Alma should have done something too. But nope, she's just like same hair and everything. So I don't know why they put that in there. Oh, and one other thing that they put in there, since I guess that they had some high hopes for this one, was this. Number 6. Let's go back further now, all the way to 1985 for a Korean number called War of the God Monsters, also called The Flying Monster. It kicks off with a young couple eaten in the water, and then there's a reporter who is assigned to do a story on a scientist that has been spinning stories about dinosaurs on modern Earth. She goes undercover to find out his story and has this mole that makes me want to quote an Austin Powers movie, but I really don't want to do that. Besides, I have a suspicion it's drawn on like a beauty mark or something. And the funny part about it is that it's actually a plot point. Like, that's how Kang is able to infiltrate the family. Because she found out that housekeeper was hired, and she tricks her into thinking the job was gone, so she takes her place and then just draws on the mole to fool Dr. Kim, who hadn't even met the housekeeper yet, so he didn't even know she had the mole to begin with. And things take a long time to get going, since by the 30-minute mark, there hasn't been any giant monster action at all, and it's just intrigue with the reporter and that mole. There's giant footprints, but then we get our first big boy at 40 minutes, and it's this giant chicken bird thing. But then there's also this fire-breathing guy with sea anemones on him, and these two may look slightly familiar. But then this bat thing appears as well, and this guy and these two should look a little more recognizable. And yeah, the trick here is that none of the monster footage from this film was shot for this film. In fact, it wasn't even from the same country. All the kaiju stuff is just footage from various Ultraman shows and movies. And it's kind of weird, because you're basically just watching a clip show, just without Ultraman coming in to save the day at the end. It's decent since there's fun monster stuff, but the human plot is fairly dull. But I guess it's worth a watch. Number 5. We're headed back to modern times now for 2019's Zilla Foot, and shows us an intro that informs us that monsters have been unleashed on the Earth with some clips from a few other movies, and humans went into space in 2031 and found other Earth-like planets that we could escape to, considering the monsters destroying ours. And there's a meteor that crashes on Earth, and it's aliens. And they call on Zilla Foot, which I'm going to assume will be a combination of Godzilla and Bigfoot. Then there's this girl whose voice and lips are so far out of sync and may be a robot.
Flash, it's Missouri.
Hey, what's up?
I was wondering if you could do me a favor. Can you take me to where the meteorite hit last night?
How are we going to get past security?
I'm sure you'll think of a way.
And if you help me, I'll do that thing you always wanted me to do.
Really?
And then, oh wait, I know these guys. This must be a Polonia joint, right? I mean, well, it is, but it's not Mark. It's his son, Anthony. And oh, I get it. No one's lips match. They're I guess doing a riff on the dubbed Godzilla flicks. But the problem is that their lips are saying the same thing, but it's just not matched up as opposed to being a totally different language. So it just looks like someone goofed up the sync instead of it being dubbed.
Some kind of new alloy? You're thinking too small. What if I told you I designed a new form of space travel?
And then these guys aren't like that. Their voices match, so I don't get what they're going for here. And we finally get a look at our guy, and yeah, he's definitely a bit of Bigfoot and Godzilla, and they actually say that in the film as they name him. So, some things hit.
La la la, swimming, so totally swimming.
And it's a little silly when they have a guy in the suit just standing next to trees, and it's very obvious that he's just a regular-sized dude next to regular-sized trees. And you guys know that I love me some Polonia, but this does not work. I mean, of course, Kirkendale is involved, and he's playing a character named Yamoto, and I realize that I enjoy Polonia flicks when they're earnest and not trying to be goofy, for the same reasons that I cited about Notzilla. And this is one of those instances where I want to like something more than I actually do. Number 4. Weirdly, we're going back to 1985 and also back to Korea for the oddball Pulgasari. But this one's not weird for its on-screen antics, but it's behind-the-scenes one. First up, the plot. This has a tiny village, and their king is pretty evil and just sort of attacks people on a whim. When an old blacksmith is unjustly imprisoned, he makes a tiny monster figurine and asks the gods to avenge him before dying. When his daughter bleeds on it, it comes to life, and at first it's super tiny, but then it starts to grow, rescuing the townspeople, and is soon human-sized. There's quite a bit of war drama for a while as the villagers take up arms against the king and try to reclaim their land, with Pulgasari as their ally. And not long after, he reaches giant proportions to help them defeat their cruel overlord. So, that's the story. And sure, it's a little strange for a kaiju flick, and probably on the same level as some of the others on here, but what's really weird here is the backstory. First of all, this is a loose remake of another film called Pulgasari from 1962, which screened in Seoul and ran for a short while, and then disappeared completely. It's now considered to be a lost film. Now, here's the crazy bit. You remember when I said that this was a Korean film? Well, I meant North Korean. It seems that Kim Jong-il was a fan of a South Korean director named Shin Sang-ok, a guy who had been directing films since the 50s but had retired around 1976 or so. Kim Jong actually had him kidnapped and brought to North Korea and forced him to direct a series of propaganda films for him, and the plan was crazy. Sang-ok had recently divorced his wife, an actress, and North Korea offered her a chance to direct films in Hong Kong. When she arrived, she was kidnapped, and Sang-ok went there to look for her and was also taken. That was in 1978, and it took years of keeping him in re-education camps to prep him to make the films. Finally, in 1983, he was informed that he needed to make the films, and only then did he discover that his ex-wife was there as well and also kidnapped, and the two were forced to remarry. He then shot 7 films, and this was the very last of them, probably the only one that wasn't blatant nationalist propaganda, and used actual members of Toho for the special effects, unaware that they were making a film in North Korea. Eventually, in '86, after 8 years of captivity, Shin and his wife escaped while attending a film festival. They relocated to America, where they were given protection, and even went to LA at one point and made some films there, including one of the 3 Ninjas movies. So, yeah, the movie's a little odd, but the story of Shin was even nuttier. Number 3. Here's another more modern production, and it's 2010's Death Kappa from Japan. It has a young girl moving out of the city, and her new town is full of people with physical deformities, and she sees a group of drunks run over her grandmother. They also crash into this idol and knock it into the ocean, and it's a Kappa, a type of goblin from folklore that live in rivers and ponds. They have shells like turtles and love to eat cucumber, and the idol comes to life. It comes out of the water and starts attacking and looks like this. The drunk teens are all killed off or captured by a mysterious man, but I think that the Kappa itself didn't kill anyone, since it's more interested in dancing, but someone shows up to kidnap it. It's a mad scientist who's trying to create a series of amphibious soldiers using the Kappa DNA. And boy, did this take a turn. And they're mutating the drunk girls. Kappa busts loose to save Kaneko, which leads to the evil Yuriko setting off a nuclear bomb. And yeah, this is only like halfway through the movie, folks. And here's where it finally becomes a kaiju film, since the bomb lets loose a giant dragon thing that immediately starts to crush the city, and they name it Hangulus. And it's pretty clear that once again, we're looking at sort of a parody or spoof of the classic kaiju flicks. But this one isn't trying to outright tell jokes, and instead wants to more feel like those old movies than I guess to outright make fun of them. And honestly, given the goofy nature of the hero character, I think it's more of a nod to Gamera than anything else. But there's just not enough giant monster action going on, and the weird all over the place nature of the early part of the film gets a bit distracting. But it's amusing enough. Number 2. Getting close to the end here, and we're going back in time once again to 1977 for the Japanese classic Legend of Dinosaurs and Monster Birds, which was also just known as the Legend of Dinosaurs. It begins with a woman falling into a cave, discovering a large stash of eggs. And after she's rescued, she tells her story to the news, which sparks interest in the existence of possible dinosaur eggs. And cue the disco theme song. Takashi here sets out to go up and find the eggs at Mount Fuji, and it appears as if there's something pretty big in the lake there that attacks a couple on a boat. They start to theorize that there might be a dinosaur in the lake, much like a Loch Ness monster, and there's attacks on the local livestock. But you see, the town is having this big dragon festival, and it's one of their biggest draws of the year, so they just say that it's a boating accident. They cover it up. So, of course, they have the festival, and before you could say you got a panic on your hands on the 4th of July, there's attacks and a sighting of a giant creature in the water. Oh, but it's a fake. Some people pulling a prank. And yeah, this is just basically Jaws. So, of course, there now has to be a real attack, right? Well, there is, and it's this big creature that's accompanied by the silliest music ever. It just does not scream monster attack, that's for sure. It then keeps terrorizing people and causing trouble, and things get more serious. And I love this part. This guy is like, well, hey, if there's one dinosaur here, you know, there might be a pterodactyl too. And he theorizes this based on the fact that one of the horse carcasses were up in a tree, even though the lake monster has a super long neck. So, you know, it seems like a wacky theory. But here's what's hilarious. He's right. Guy's like, well, if there's an underwater one, maybe there's a flying one. Sure enough, there is. And this was absolutely created as a ripoff of Jaws. The head of Toei at the time had thought that they could capitalize on American trends. And since Jaws was so popular at that point, they figured that using the same plot for a kaiju would work as well. Honestly, it kind of drags, but it's pretty crazy to see that whole formula applied to this, which works as a kaiju film, but also as a roundabout Nessie movie. Number 1. We end this list with the highest profile project on here, and it's 2016's Colossal. The beginning kicks off with a little girl seeing a giant monster before jumping ahead 25 years and introducing us to Gloria. She's with the guest and is struggling to get her life together since she's out of a job and drinking too much, and she's kicked out. She ends up moving back into her old home in New Hampshire and reunites with Ted Lasso, a childhood friend. He takes her to his bar and the leader is there, and she slips right into her old ways, and on the way home passes through a small playground. Later, on the news, she sees that a giant monster has appeared in Korea and marched through the city, causing destruction. Frightened, she tries to reconcile with Tim, calling him from the playground, and once again the monster appears and she notices that its movements look familiar. Very soon, she figures out that if she is in the playground at 8:05 a.m. specifically, the creature will appear at the same time and mimic her. When they attack the monster, she feels the pain and soon finds out that when Oscar goes on the playground, he will appear as a giant robot. Soon, there's some dramatic twists and turns as true motivations are revealed, and the mystery of why it's all happened comes out. And the director here is Nacho Vigalondo, who also wrote the film, and he's the director behind the awesome Time Crimes, which is just an amazing time travel flick. And he's also done some segments for both VHS and ABCs of Death, and this was sort of his ticket into a bit more mainstream world films, even though the budget was pretty modest at $15 million, which is very surprising since it looks like it cost a hell of a lot more. It was pretty critically acclaimed, even though it did not do well at the box office, only pulling in $4.5 million, and even landed a lawsuit from Toho because they were using Godzilla images in their early promotional materials for investors. And I can't tell you how much I love this movie. It's just insanely well written, and the character work is outstanding. There's a bit with a character that goes through what seems like a rather dramatic personality shift, and it may seem jarring at first until you realize that that side was always there, and it's sort of a commentary about not noticing the darker edge of people until it's too late. And I'm sad that it didn't do well, because it's one that I think deserves to be seen and appreciated, and probably one of the weirder and more interesting takes on the kaiju genre that I've seen. So there you have it, 10 movies, all involving giant monsters stepping on cities in some way, shape, or another. I guess not all of them were cities. A couple of them were like just towns or villages or whatever. But giant monsters destroying stuff in a weird way. And yeah, there's a ton of these. There's lots more of these actually that I could dip into in the future. So they'll most likely be an addendum to this list. I have a bunch more listed out there, but let me know if there's other ones that you could think about and put them down below on what you'd like to see on a follow-up to this list. And if you enjoyed this list, hit the like button. And if you enjoy the channel, subscribe to it and hit the little bell so that I know that you want to see more videos and that you'll get them recommended to you. And also, if you think about it, go to my Patreon page at patreon.com/movietimelines, where you can help support this channel. I'd certainly appreciate that. These guys do that. They're all pretty awesome, so you can be one of them. Otherwise, keep on watching these videos, and I'll see you very shortly for another great one. Thanks a lot, guys, and bye-bye.